this is kind of a warm, friendly place where I can get away with it. Not scaring off too many people. Anthony Gregory, anyone know Anthony?
Yeah.
He writes for Lou Rockwell. He works for the Independent Institute. Awesome guy, very good friend of mine. Pretty good cook, too.
He wears that, too.
Anthony wears it. Yeah, well, he's copying me. I like that hat. I went to go see him at this event called Libertopia a couple of years ago. It's not the same, I guess. I always thought the film Libertopia had, which I haven't seen. I didn't realize this was a Free State Project film. I got to see it. I thought it was about the kind of anarchist convention that they have out in California. So I went to this thing. Peter Thiel's there. I think Patrick Friedman was speaking there. And, I walk into the lobby. I'm going to go hang out with my friend. And, of course, Anthony's hanging out with all the luminaries. He's, like, talking with Roderick Long and Sheldon Richman, people that I've read for a long time that I respect. And Sheldon, I'm a bit of a fanboy, so I'm kind of like a teen girl at a Justin Bieber concert. Sheldon Richman is here. Wow, teach me some economics. Economics is my weak point, so I love learning from these guys. And so Anthony, he's like, all right, hey dude, I'm going to introduce you to my friends. Just like these people are no big deal or whatever. And he's like, Roderick, Sheldon, everybody, here's Michael Boldin. He's basically the Tea Party guy at the event. Oh, man! Oh, good, people get it. I mean, I love working with Tea Party people. I love working with commies and Occupy people. I want to talk to anybody who's willing to listen, right? So I don't have anything opposed to anybody who associates with any particular group. I just recognize that as a former communist, I've never voted, guy who runs an organization advocating civil disobedience on weed and basically every single thing else in the world, I'm probably not really that guy because I'm not going to vote for just a Republican like 92% of Tea Party said they're going to just, no matter what, they'll vote for Republicans. So, so Anthony was trying to give me a hard time amongst people that I was really a fan of. All right, well, that's my stuff. I was really excited to share that. Okay, do you want to do Q&A? I'm not really used to Q&A. All right, cool.
I'm a big fan of nullification.
Okay, cool. We all should be.
Yes.
There's some baklava that's nullifying the
I just
food
had
laws.
some.
Yeah. Back to the baklava.
And my question is, although it might be irrelevant, I wrote a paper about it. My professor said for someone who goes with the original intent of the Constitution, how can you support nullification? Do you have an answer for that? Because it's not in the Constitution, but yet I don't feel that it's wrong.
Yeah, sure. First of all, if it's that guy or Thomas Jefferson, I think I'm probably pretty good going with TJ. That's number one. So Jefferson thought, and he wrote in 1798 a draft for what was called the Kentucky Resolution,
right,
1798. Right. And the quote is, I don't want to get too boring with this stuff. This is a fun event, but Jefferson wrote that, quote, whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy. So what he's saying in layman's terms is anytime they do stuff that they're not authorized to do, which is basically constantly, then what you're supposed to do is nullify. And if nullify means then any set of actions that results in that law being rendered null and void, then Jefferson is telling you every single time you're not supposed to wait 2 or 4 years for some politicians to come into office. You're not supposed to wait 6 years for a court ruling. You're supposed to stop it right now. That's Jefferson's view. But the other thing they're saying is nullification is not in the Constitution, right? Well, this is a complete misunderstanding of how that piece of paper with the words on work. This person is absolutely clueless about what the Constitution is, how it functions. It's hard to... It's like trying to talk about man, economy, and state to an Obama supporter or a Romney supporter. It's just not easy. You got to take baby steps with these people. And the Constitution is a set of rules that tells the federal government what it can do, and the Bill of Rights says other things that it cannot do. And there's also some limitations on states. And I mentioned earlier that states are authorized to do a lot of dumb stuff. And James Madison made this clear when he said that the powers delegated to the federal government are few and defined, those reserved to the states are numerous and definite. Basically, if there's not an explicit restriction on the power of a state mentioned in the Constitution, it is not unconstitutional. That's why Romneycare, that awful piece of garbage, is still constitutional, though bad. So someone could make an argument, and I would have a discussion with somebody that, oh, nullification, it's just chaos and anarchy, it's evil. So, I mean, that's a valid debate to have, whether it's a good choice or a bad choice, and it may even be a valid debate to have, is it worth it to, because anytime you do this, you have to recognize that you are civilly disobeying, or maybe you're civilly obeying the Constitution, whatever you want to call it, but you're basically defying laws, and the feds are scary people, and if you're going to do it alone, it's going to be difficult. When Texas tried to do this, and people followed Texas versus the TSA last year that we were kind of on front of. So Texas, who was basically trying to criminalize feds for trying to search you without probable cause. They passed a really cool nullification bill in the House. I think it was John Bush. Was it unanimous in Texas?
The first vote, yeah.
Okay, so everybody in the Texas House, Democrats, Republicans, and whatever, they all voted in favor of nullifying the TSA of Texas. Then it comes to the Texas Senate, and the feds start threatening basically a no-fly zone. If you guys pass this, we're going to shut down your airports. Well, that's a really good way to get a state to crumble, right? Well, they did the same thing to California. We're going to shut down all your businesses in California if you sell this weed. Well, people in California said, you have your opinion, now come and enforce it. And the bottom line is, one state going alone is going to be very difficult. Or one individual violating a law on their own, it's going to be very difficult. But there is, you know how they always say that united we stand, divided we fall, but they're trying to get you to be united behind all the evil actions of the federal government. But united in the cause of liberty, we're going to have a far greater chance of defeating these people. Does that help a little bit?
Kind of. There's another part to that. Madison, when John C. Calhoun wanted to
Okay,
do
so
nullification,
yeah, I mean, that's a long discussion.
said no.
1835,
Yeah.
James Madison wrote something called Notes on Nullification. And I've actually read this. A lot of people who use this say that, they don't really, they only read a couple of quotes, but I've read the whole thing many times. And Madison specifically says, yes, I never advocated that a single state can nullify a federal law. And what he was responding to was the South Carolina proposal that said not only that they were going to render the law null, but it would require 3/4 of the other states to stop them. So in other words, they were basically taking the position that one state would have control over the entire country, one area over the entire country, kind of one area, Washington, D.C., over the whole country. One area, South Carolina, control the whole country. Same kind of concept. Madison was saying, it is absurd to think that one small area can make a decision for the entire country. He specifically said, no, I don't agree with this. But he also said there's a few options on how to deal with unconstitutional actions. You can vote bums out, you can sue them, you can pass a constitutional amendment. And although he didn't call it nullification, even though he supported the concept many years earlier, I guess politicians flip-flop back then too, he did support it in name. He said a state, and this is the most important thing, that in cases of dangerous attacks on liberty, a state can resort to its natural law and resist encroachments by the federal government, but they just shouldn't expect that the feds are going to comply with it. It takes great risk. So that is nullification. It just may not be called it. And Heritage Foundation attacks us on nullification all the time, the big government conservative guys, and they basically say the same thing. We're in favor of the Healthcare Freedom Act, which bans mandates in South Dakota, but just don't call it nullification because we don't support that. So this would be a long discussion, but that's the basics. I'm sorry.
Probably a good blueprint for folks that want to nullify is to look at what Wyoming's been doing.
Yes.
Wyoming, because they don't have to suckle from the government teeth for money, has been able to, like the wolf management plan, push back. In fact, they put a wolf management plan out probably 10 years ago that said in Yellowstone they're protected, in national parks around it as a trophy game animal. The rest of the state, it's a predator, it means any time. Keep going back and forth, they never changed the text. The federal government finally backed down.
Well, that's what happens, and we actually see. So the gentleman here is talking about Wyoming and federal lands. If you guys are familiar with the issue of...
The point is, if you don't pay federal money, like California is so dependent on federal money, Texas is so dependent on federal money, Wyoming could just say, go away. The same thing with the Canadian law. Matt Mead, who's the current governor, used to be the federal prosecutor for Wyoming. So Wyoming Firearms Freedom Act says if you make a firearm in a state, it's sold to someone in the state never leaves the state. The federal government can't regulate what we make. They put a provision in their law that says if the federal agent comes in to enforce federal law against this in Wyoming, they'll be arrested and charged with a felony.
And you know where that concept is? Did everybody hear that? Okay, so he's talking about what goes on in Wyoming on two different issues. basically the fact that Wyoming isn't taking as much federal funds as the rest of us. And that, of course, is an important thing. It's much easier to resist when they don't pull away, what people think are essential services, right? So it is easier. Although California is probably not in that case, they still are, with enough numbers, the market still wins, and people are still being with it, although it is much easier. So the better you get your own local area financially in order, you're going to have a greater chance. But then he also talked about something called the Firearms Freedom Act, which has been passed in 8 states around the country over the last couple of years. This is a law that says if a gun is made in your state and sold in your state, then therefore this is not traveling in interstate commerce, and the feds need to keep their dirty hands the hell off of it. Well, what Wyoming did to kind of move this up a notch, and they actually got the idea from Dan Itza here in New Hampshire. That's where this concept originated. They also added sanctions on federal agents for violating that state law, and it said, I think it started out at 5 years, and the final version passed was at 2 years. Okay, so 2 years, 2 years jail time for someone who tries to violate this state law on firearms. And now, right now, so we've also drafted similar type of language to be used on a state or a local or a county level in regards to NDAA kidnapping powers. And I don't think kidnapping is hyperbole, because when you refer to indefinite detention, you remove due process from arrest. It is nothing more than government-sanctioned kidnapping. So we've got bills that are being introduced and considered around the country, and one in Tennessee basically says that, hey, it literally says kidnapping. If a federal agent kidnaps a resident of Tennessee, our sheriffs are going to arrest them. So, yes, I don't know if a lot of people are ready for that kind of backbone. Maybe you guys can pull that off here in New Hampshire and set an example for everybody else. I hope so. That is kind of what it would kind of get down
The
to.
key thing there is the governor is an Department of Justice prosecutor
Yes.
in the state of Wyoming.
He was a Clinton guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But,
He's a Teton County guy.
Right.
We have one other one here. I don't know if you're aware of this, but New Hampshire's constitution was written before the federal.
yeah, Article 7.
10.
10 is an article? Okay. It's another 10.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
into
the
it.
one that says there's the right of revolution, and it says it's not just the right; it's does you have a duty to, you ought to get rid of it, and it talks about non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd.
He's talking about Article 10 for those of you who can't.
And destructive of the good and happiness of man. So,
Yeah, well, it's important. And the politicians that were passing the Kentucky resolutions in 1798, they were concerned about the word nullification being introduced into their resolution, because they thought that nullification was basically a kind of a revolution. Although I don't like John in his speech, I don't like the idea of revolving around the back, same thing. I'm going to start stealing that, because that's awesome. And moving forward to something. Thank you. Moving forward to something new, something more free is definitely more important. So, of course, it says in the state constitution, even if it didn't say it in the New Hampshire state constitution, I feel it is your duty to resist laws that are unconstitutional, immoral, or unjust. And that's the way most state constitutions are really bad around the country. Anyways, a lot of them, well, whatever, they're just never followed. Red?
You were talking about earlier, you mentioned about the non-political activity and the political activity working together.
Mm-hmm.
That's how New Hampshire got out of Real ID.
Right.
We had all the street theater and the people protesting, and then those of us working in the legislature against very heavy federal pressure. We actually were the first state to say no.
Right.
And the feds ended up doing what are they going to do? We're not taking your money. Oh, okay.
So, Real ID Act, this is something passed in 2005, Bush administration, that basically, you had something more,
Yeah, just the point, it does work.
Yes.
We actually proved it does. I guess there are two things about notification. You had the notification by simply not complying. I'm
Right.
not going to call this law as a sort of I'm going to call it a modern federalist approach, saying states going, no, we're going to tell the federal government, we are not going to enforce this law, this law doesn't apply to us.
Right.
You sort of got the two halves of notification.
Yes.
So what, obviously, would you see one is better than the other?
No.
Do you see
Is one better than the other? Is non-compliance or political action better than one or the other? I don't think so.
How do you see them, but is it like, does one tend to follow the other?
I think the political action tends to follow the non-compliance action, at least in my study of it. The Real ID Act is the other way around, because that was, that was really just political pressure first, and then New Hampshire here, Maine, Montana decided to pass laws saying we will not comply with the federal government on this mandated ID card that's going to be expensive, that's going to violate people's rights. So it can go either way, and I think that's why Anthony Gregory's advice is really, really sound. Whatever you think is best for you, and that's what we should probably believe in as people who support the free market. Whatever is best for your neighbor or for you is the best thing for you to pursue. Now, also recognizing that markets are very powerful. If I'm pursuing a political action and no one's getting on board and everybody else is burning their ID, I'm probably going to go burn the ID and say forget about the legislation, because I want more success. I want more nullification. I want more resistance, whether the state government is supporting me or not. But I wanted to also mention something about the Real ID Act. So there was a governor, a Democrat governor in Montana, who was on NPR back in 2008. And this kind of applies to the TSA issue when Texas was trying to defy the TSA. So the governor was on NPR, and they had been getting threats because they passed a law that literally said we are going to nullify the Real ID Act. They were one of the first, I think the first ones that actually used nullify in modern times. And the NPR is asking them, like, oh, you know, the Bush administration, they're basically threatening that if you don't comply with this Real ID Act by some March of 2008 or whatever it was, that your residents aren't going to be able to go on airplanes, they're not going to be able to go in federal buildings. Why they'd want to do that, I don't know. And you know, they're not going to be able to do all kinds of stuff. And what do you think about that? How do you want to deal with it? Well, on NPR, this governor said, and I think this is the blueprint. Well, we feel that it's best to just tell them to go to hell, and we'll govern our state the way we want to govern our state. A Democrat. Some of my lefty friends are pretty awesome. I'm sorry, was there another question? I don't know how long we have here. John Bush.
To address the Real ID, we found in fighting the Real ID in Texas, where we didn't have a Real ID Act passed, they're moving forward with it administratively without any legislation authorizing it. In many of the states that passed the Real ID nullification, you'll find that if you look deep enough, that the bureaucracies and the Department of Transportation or the DMV or whatnot are actually carrying out some of the complaints. I think it's like 13 to 15 things that make a state Real ID compliant. So
It used to be 25.
25. If you look at New Hampshire, I venture to guess they're still carrying those out, regardless of the legislation, doing it through administrative via.
The legislation specifically properly prohibits it.
Yes, it does. And John is correct. There are a number of states that are moving forward on it anyways. And I think, okay, so yes, I agree that passing Real ID nullification is a very good thing. Governor Schweitzer in Montana saying, you know, go to hell, we'll govern how we want, is a good thing. These are all good things. But without follow through, like, oh, they passed this law, we're good. You know, it's kind of like saying, they wrote this Constitution and, you know, they can only regulate interstate commerce. We're good. It doesn't work.
Montana also seems to be leading the way on protecting gun owner rights for medical marijuana users.
Yeah, well, that's a big thing. They come after, you know, weed owners weed users who own guns, gun users who own weed. Was there another question for someone who hasn't asked one yet, or any new ones? Okay, we'll go back here. Well, you haven't asked one, have you, officially?
No.
Okay, cool.
In regards to nullification, and you mentioned two examples, bus boycott and medical marijuana. The way I see this, the bus boycott ended up quite a lot of violence and a little more hard resistance. Medical marijuana, at least in Denver, is as mentioned, a massive market, but also their coding is largely based on a tax revenue stream. That's how it's becoming.
Tax revenue is violence.
I realize, but that's how they're bringing it to mainstream voters and appeal to them. How do you apply nullification to laws that are inherently private, such as taxation?
It's good to take a lot of background. Okay, so he's saying, you know, you talked about two examples, Rosa Parks, which resulted in there was a lot of violence, and then medical marijuana, which in Denver has been mostly peaceful other than the violent taxation. But I'll tell you, and I talked about this on Free Talk Live a little bit last night, too. Mark had mentioned to me, he's like, hey, you know, because I I go to gun events and I challenge them. I'm like, hey guys, you guys have the same courage as the pot smokers because you guys are waiting for permission to carry your guns, and these guys are doing it without it. A lot of times they'll pause for a minute and also be like, oh yeah, cool, right. Headline, CPAC attendees cheer marijuana legalization. True, it happened. When we showed our film, which is going to screen here later tonight, Nullification, the Rightful Remedy. I think it's at like 9 or 9:30 down in the amphitheater. So we've had a documentary about our tour, which came through here. Tom Woods, Kevin Gutzman, Sheriff Mack, a lot of these guys are featured in this. So if you want to check out a movie tonight, rather than just partying, you can check out the movie and then get wasted. So the two ways, so Rosa Parks or medical marijuana. Medical marijuana was not a non-violent thing because the federal government was very aggressive when California went alone. Friends of mine absorbed a lot of that violence. A lot of people lost their property. They lost their liberty. They were thrown in cages. And I'm sure some of them lost their lives too. People used to do, seriously, this is like hippie land, I guess. People would do, arm-in-arm barricades around marijuana dispensaries. And a lot of times that didn't work too well because they bust through anyways. But people had serious resistance. And it takes the people early on with the courage that are going to deal with that kind of garbage before a state like Colorado can follow up. Sorry guys, you're a little slow. And actually have it a little bit easier. That's why I think looking to the Free State where all these courageous activists are saying, hey, I'm going to move across country, or maybe I'm going to walk the entire way. And I'm going to come here, I'm going to do something. I'm going to do civil actions or civil disobedience, or I'm going to do political action. But people here, we're kind of looking to you guys to have more courage to do stuff. And you were talking about the how to deal with the taxes.
Just more private laws. These are both things that are
Well,
people band together. There's,
give me an example of a private law that I want to defy. I would have a hard time.
Income
I
tax.
guess one thing is, a dispensary is, a physical location that people can.
Oh, so like an income tax applies to you, they'll just take your bank account or
Just
something.
walk into your house. No one's going to, pick at your house. Or
True.
everyone's house.
I think governments, in essence, are houses of cards. And even the greatest tyrants back in old England recognized that if you really pissed off too many people, they'd kind of fall to pieces. There is a state nullification response to the income tax, actually. I don't think anyone is ready for this type of thing yet. This is pretty hardcore. Down in Georgia, a guy named Robbie Franklin who passed away recently, and up in Washington State, a friend of mine called Matt Shea introduced a bill, maybe it was last year, called the Federal Tax Funds Act. It was basically the state saying, okay, well, you guys have been basically violating your power over, income tax and taking money for stuff you're not supposed to be doing for a long, long time. So this isn't the perfect thing, but the concept is the state would then create an escrow fund, and the state would collect the federal taxes for the federal government, and then they'd have this review board that basically says, okay, well, you guys have only basically followed the Constitution 10% of the time, so we're going to divvy out the 10%, and we're going to send it back to keep the rest of it here. It's a possible solution. That's some serious business. The IRS is very scary people. They brandished guns and came in on my brother because he wasn't paying them enough. So I recognize that they are very scary people, probably scarier than the DEA and the TSA combined. But I guess at some point, you're going to have to deal with the taxation issue. I just don't know if people are ready for that kind of action yet.
Sorry, I came in late. Did you talk at all about the registrar of deeds in terms of the IRS?
No.
Okay, so there's this idea that this is happening in a couple of California counties. So
Oh,
if
cool.
people don't
Free
pay
California.
yeah,
Nice.
little parts of it, I guess. So if people don't pay their taxes, apparently what happens is the IRS sends a notice of lien to the county registrar office, and then because the IRS doesn't have any ability to create a lien, so what the registrars then do is they create a lien, which doesn't actually seem to be authorized by any power in their constitution. So a couple of registrars in California have said, we don't have this power to create this lien.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So New Hampshire has 10 counties, and the registrar of deeds is an elected position, which usually is campaigned for with a few signs outside. So in theory, someone could get together,
And just not issue those liens?
and just not
That would be awesome. I mean, I've not heard of this, but yeah, get my card afterwards. If you can email me a little bit more information about that. That's something we should be promoting. But that's really good. That's defying the feds on taking people's
So
property.
this could be like a, you know, if a $500, maybe $1,000 cost to win a local election like that.
Well,
Great example.
Well, not only that, but to amplify your point, if there is no legitimate lien and somebody acts to take your property, that's a crime. They could be prosecuted criminally.
Well, I just don't trust the courts to prosecute their
I'm
friends.
just saying,
It just almost never happens. Impeach Bush. Oh yeah. Well, that worked. So, I'm sorry. Any other ones? I'm happy to talk as long as you guys want. I think we have a lunch break or something, but whatever. You guys good?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.